Picture, if you will, the absolute meat grinder of an Imperial war zone. The air is thick with the stench of promethium, vaporized blood, and the deafening roar of artillery shattering the earth. Round you, veteran guardsmen weep in the mud, their minds breaking under the sheer, suffocating terror of a tyrannid swarm or relentless orc. It is a place where hope goes to die, and humanity is reduced to trembling prey. Now imagine stepping through this nightmare of flying shrapnel and severed limbs. A towering colossus, standing over 9 feet tall, with arms thick enough to crush a space marine's helm. This hulking brute isn't cowed. He isn't praying for a salvation. In fact, he is smiling. With a crude, booming laugh, he charges headlong into certain death, wielding a weapon the size of a light cannon like a simple club. This is the Ogryn, and his smile is not born of superhuman courage, nor is it the bloodthirsty madness of a chaos worshipper. It is born of something far more heartbreaking, profound, insurmountable ignorance. If you want to understand the true, horrifying cost of loyalty in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, subscribe to the channel and join us. Today, we decode the darkest tragedy of the Astra Militarum. In an empire built upon the cold, calculated sacrifice of trillions, where inquisitors burn entire worlds without a second thought, the Ogryn is a bizarre anomaly. They are walking siege engines, engineered by harsh evolution to be virtually unstoppable. Yet, trapped within these mountains of muscle is the cognitive capacity of a very young child. They do not understand the grand strategy of the Imperium, nor the cosmic horrors they face. To them, the Emp'rah is not a distant, decaying god on a golden throne. He is a literal father figure who watches them from the stars, demanding only that they follow orders and protect their friends. But the Imperium does not nurture this innocence. It weaponizes it, to grasp the sheer cruelty of their existence. We must first look at what it truly means to be born an Abhuman. To comprehend the tragedy of the Ogryn, you must first understand what they actually are. In the vast, xenophobic expanse of the Imperium, humanity is obsessed with genetic purity. Any deviation from the holy human form is usually met with cleansing fire. Yet, there are exceptions. These are the Abhuman strains of humanity that have drifted so far from their ancestral baseline that they are categorized as entirely new. Subspecies, among them, the Homo sapiens gigantus reign supreme in sheer physical dominance. Consider the crucibles that forged them. Long before the Emp'rah walked among the stars, during the forgotten epochs of human expansion, colonists settled on worlds of crushing gravity and desolate, unforgiving environments. Many of these planets were brutal penal colonies, where survival was a daily, agonizing struggle. Over millennia of isolation, cut off from the light of terror, the human genome was forced into a horrifying, accelerated evolution just to endure the crushing weight of their own worlds. But evolution, especially in the grim darkness of the galaxy, always demands a heavy toll. To survive the immense atmospheric pressure and lethal floor of these death worlds, the Ogryns' physiology expanded. Their bones thickened into dense, unbreakable plating, and their muscles layered into impenetrable slabs of raw power. However, this magnificent physical adaptation came at a devastating evolutionary cost. The brain, starved of resources to fuel this massive bodily growth, fundamentally regressed. This is the biological tragedy of the Ogryn. They traded the complex cognitive functions of their ancestors, their ability to philosophize, to invent, to question for the simple, brutal capacity to survive. Their minds devolved into a state of perpetual infancy. An adult Ogryn, capable of wrestling a tyrannid monstrosity to a standstill, possesses the emotional and intellectual maturity of a very young human child. They struggle with basic counting, possess a severely limited vocabulary, and are easily frightened by the unknown. Now, ask yourself, how does the most ruthless, intolerant regime in fiction treats such a creature. The Imperium of man does not view the Ogryn with pity or compassion. In a society where ordinary human life is the cheapest currency, the Ogryn is not considered a citizen with rights. They are categorized merely as living, breathing military hardware. They are tolerated to exist solely because their colossal strength and unthinking obedience make them incredibly efficient tools of war. The Inquisition and the Adeptus Terra despise the mutant, but they are pragmatic enough to exploit a useful monster because the Ogryn lacks the intelligence to question orders. They are immune to the subtle philosophical temptations that lead smarter men to rebellion. The Imperium looks at these overgrown, simple-minded children and sees only the perfect, disposable shock troops. They are drafted by the millions, ripped from their harsh home worlds, and thrust into the eternal meat grinder of the Imperial Guard. They are not taught to understand the complex wars they fight. They are simply pointed at the enemy and told that killing them will make the Emp'rah happy. It is a grotesque exploitation of innocence. The Imperium takes the purest, most unquestioning loyalty available to humanity and uses it as a blunt instrument to bash against the horrors of the galaxy. But the physical abuse is only a fraction of their torment, for the true nightmare lies within their own minds. To truly grasp the horror of the Ogryns' existence, you must look past the colossal muscles and impenetrable bone plating. You must look into their minds. There is a profound, almost sickening cognitive dissonance at the core of their being. They possess the physical capacity to tear a heavily armored Chaos Space Marine limb from limb. Yet they navigate the universe with the emotional and intellectual fragility of a 5-year-old child. Imagine, for a moment, trying to explain the concept of a multi-system, apocalyptic galactic war to a toddler. You cannot. It is simply impossible. An Ogryn operates purely on fundamental, basic associations. They understand loud noises. They understand physical pain. They understand who their friends are. And above all else, they understand the concept of Emp'rah. This brings us to the deeply twisted dynamic between the Ogryn and the Imperial Commissar. To a regular guardsman, a Commissar is a terrifying figure of absolute authority, a grim executioner waiting to put a bolt round through the skull of anyone who shows cowardice. But to an Ogryn, the Commissar represents something entirely different. The Commissar is the ultimate parental figure, a direct, infallible conduit to the Emperor himself. This absolute, unshakable trust is weaponized by the Astra Militarum without a shred of hesitation. When an Ogryn looks at a Commissar, they do not see a ruthless tyrant enforcing a fascist military doctrine. They see a benevolent guide who will tell them exactly how to be a good boar. The officers know this, and they manipulate this childlike devotion to push the Ogryns into the most lethal combat zones imaginable. But the battlefield is only half of the nightmare. Consider the psychological toll of their deployment. The Astra Militarum relies heavily on mechanized infantry to cross war-torn continents. For a standard squad of guardsmen, riding in a Chimera armored transport is a loud, uncomfortable necessity. For an Ogryn, it is an agonizing descent into psychological hell. To understand their sheer terror, you must remember their origins. Their brutal home worlds were often defined by wide-open, desolate expanses. Consequently, almost all Ogryns suffer from severe, paralyzing claustrophobia. Being forced into dark, cramped, enclosed spaces goes against every primal survival instinct their mutated biology possesses. Now imagine the suffocating darkness inside an armored Chimera transport. You are 9 feet of solid muscle, crammed into a rattling metal box built for ordinary men. The air is stifling, reeking of stale sweat, ozone, and burning machine oil. Every jolt of the heavy tracks against the ruined earth sends a tremor of primal panic through your massive, aching frame. You cannot stand. You can barely breathe. The dim, flickering red lumen globes cast long, terrifying shadows against the steel bulkhead, feeding a deep, childish fear of the dark that your augmented brain simply cannot rationalize away. You grip your massive Ripper gun so tightly your thick knuckles turn white, desperately whispering the single, crude prayer you know to the god Emp'rah, just hoping the metal walls don't crush you alive. Then, the assault ramp finally drops. Blinding light and the deafening, earth-shattering roar of artillery flood the cramped cavern. You do not charge out into the gunfire because you are brave, or because you understand tactical superiority. You charge out because the sheer terror of the open battlefield is vastly preferable to the agonizing, suffocating cage of the transport. The Emp'rah protects, but the metal box only torments. Out in the mud and the blood, the cognitive disconnect continues to dictate their tragic fate. An Ogryn does not understand the nuances of suppressing fire, intricate flanking maneuvers, or the strategic necessity of a tactical retreat. They understand only two very simple imperatives: protect your little friends and smash the bad men who want to hurt them. Their perception of mortality is equally heartbreaking. When a fellow guardsman, one they have come to view as a friend, falls in combat, an Ogryn might frantically try to shake them awake. They simply cannot comprehend the permanent finality of a lost blast through the skull. They weep for their fallen human comrades with the unrestrained, wailing sorrow of a heartbroken child, ignoring the lost fire scorching their own flesh, and yet, amidst this profound sorrow, they remain entirely, pathetically compliant. The Imperial officers routinely use this childish affection to point them directly at the most heavily fortified, suicidal enemy positions. An officer will not explain the tactical value of a bunker. They will simply point to the monstrous Tyrannid Carnifex or the towering Orc Meganob and claim that the alien has insulted the Emp'rah. That is all it takes. A simple, fabricated insult to an absentee, decaying father figure turns a gentle, simple-minded giant into an engine of unparalleled devastation. They will throw themselves onto spinning chainswords and gladly absorb blistering volleys of heavy bolter fire, solely to earn a fleeting pat on the back from a lieutenant who views them as nothing more than expendable, walking ammunition. But what happens when that simple loyalty is tested by the esoteric, mind-bending horrors of the war? How does a mind so infantile perceive the twisted reality of chaos? The answer reveals a strange, accidental purity that the Inquisition heavily relies upon, even as they openly despise the Abhuman foe. Consider this: a magnificent space marine, engineered to be the ultimate weapon of humanity, can fall to the insidious whispers of chaos. They possess pride, ambition, and a burning desire for martial perfection, deep psychological vulnerabilities that the Dark Gods can easily exploit. The Ogryn has absolutely none of these complex flaws. They only want to eat, sleep, and make the Emp'rah proud. Their minds are simply too small, too simplistic to grasp the concept of heresy, let alone commit it intentionally. They are protected by an impenetrable shield of absolute, unthinking ignorance. It is a pathetic, beautiful, and deeply horrifying reality. The very stunted intellect that makes them a disposable tool for the meat grinder also makes them one of the few genuinely incorruptible forces in a galaxy consumed by madness. Now that we understand the tragic, childlike innocence trapped within their minds, we must look at how the Imperium practically applies this innocence on the battlefield. When the Astra Militarum faces an enemy too numerous or too physically overwhelming for standard human infantry, they do not hesitate. They unleash the Abhumans. The Ogryn are not deployed as tactical assets. They are deployed as a living, breathing wall of meat and bone, designed specifically to absorb the most horrific punishment imaginable. Consider the terrifying reality of a Tyrannid planetary invasion, or the brutal, deafening charge of an Orc war. Standard Laskans often fail to stop these monstrous Xenos before they reach the trenches. The guardsmen are slaughtered in close quarters. To prevent this, the commanders position Ogryn squads directly in the path of the heaviest enemy assaults. They are ordered to stand their ground against towering alien monstrosities that would shatter the sanity of an ordinary man. To facilitate this suicidal duty, the Departmentum Unitorum equips them with the Reaper gun. At first glance, it is a devastating, heavy-caliber automatic shotgun capable of tearing through heavily armored targets. But when you examine its design closely, the grimdark reality of the Ogryns' mental state is immediately apparent. The Reaper gun is not a weapon of precision. It is a foolproof tool, explicitly engineered to be operated by a mind that cannot comprehend basic firearms safety or tactical discipline. One of the most cynical features of the Reaper gun is its built-in ammunition limiter. When the adrenaline spikes and the terrifying roar of combat erupts, an Ogryn will panic. In their childlike fear and excitement, they will simply hold down the trigger until the weapon clicks empty, leaving them completely defenseless against the encroaching horde. The Imperium knows this. Therefore, the limiter forces the gun to fire in short bursts, mechanically preventing the Abhuman from wasting precious resources in a fit of terror. It is a brilliant, entirely heartless piece of engineering that perfectly encapsulates how the Emperor's commanders view these gentle giants. They are an investment that must be managed, not soldiers to be trusted. If you are finding value in this deep dive into the darkest corners of Warhammer 40K lore, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It helps us continue to decode the horrifying truths hidden beneath the propaganda of the Imperium. But the ammunition limiter is only half of the Reaper gun's twisted design. The Munitorum is fully aware that once the gun inevitably runs dry, or when the enemy closes the distance, the Ogryn will revert to their most primal instincts. They do not reload in the heat of battle. They simply use the weapon as a giant club. Because of this, the Reaper gun is forged with an incredibly thick, reinforced stock and a heavy, brutal chassis. It is intentionally built to survive being repeatedly smashed into the skulls of armored orcs and Tyranid warriors. The weapon is treated with more care and strategic forethought than the living being wielding it. The Ogryn crashes into the enemy lines, swinging this heavy slab of metal with devastating, bone-shattering force. They fight not with martial skill, but with the desperate, flailing panic of a frightened child trying to swat away a swarm of angry hornets. And they die. They die in staggering, unrecorded numbers. They are ripped apart by power claws, dissolved by bioacid, and crushed beneath the treads of enemy war engines. They absorb the devastating blows meant for the regular human infantry behind them. The commanders watch through their magnoculars, completely indifferent to the slaughter, calculating the acceptable losses. The Ogryns hold the line with their own mutilated flesh, dying with the Emperor's name on their bloody lips, completely unaware that their sacrifice was calculated on a spreadsheet before the battle even began. While the standard Ogryn is a tragic figure protected by a thick layer of blissful amens, the cruelty of the Imperium knows absolutely no bounds. When Astra Militarum commanders require these colossal Abhumans to follow slightly more complex orders than simply charging forward, they do not bother with training or education. Instead, they subject the most promising individuals to the bone treatment, biochemical Ogryn neural enhancement. It sounds clinical and precise, but the grim reality is a brutal, agonizing violation of their very being. Imagine being strapped down to a cold, blood-stained metal table, utterly terrified and confused, as emotionless tech priests and trojans carve into your impossibly thick skull. They implant crude, sparking cybernetics directly into the soft tissue of the brain. There is no gentle anesthesia, no comforting words from a parental figure. There is only the cold, mechanical cruelty of the Adeptus Mechanicus violently forcing a stunted mind to expand, painfully wiring artificial neural pathways to enhance cognitive function. The survivors of this horrific procedure are designated as boneheads, a crude, marking slang term used by the regular guardsmen. Physically, they remain the same towering, unstoppable brutes. But mentally, everything has fundamentally shifted. The surgery grants them the ability to understand tactical comms, operate basic voxcasters, and coordinate their fellow Abhumans. But this artificial intelligence comes with a devastating, soul-crushing side effect. The protective shield of their childlike ignorance is violently ripped away. For the first time in their miserable lives, a bonehead actually understands what is happening around them. They no longer view a tyrannid swarm simply bad bugs to be squashed for the Emp'rah. They comprehend the existential dread of the Great Devourer. They recognize the scent of rotting flesh and the mathematical certainty of their own demise. The horrific, suffocating scale of the galactic war suddenly crashes down upon a fragile mind that was never naturally evolved to process such terror. This is the ultimate atrocity of the bone implant. The Imperium takes the only true mercy these gentle giants possess, their unthinking innocence, and surgically extracts it. A bonehead slowly realizes that their beloved commissar is not a loving father figure, but a cold, calculating executioner who is intentionally sending them to die. They finally understand the absolute permanence of death. When their friends are vaporized by plasma fire, they do not just weep. They mourn with the agonizing, paralyzing clarity of a self-aware adult. Yet, because of the invasive agmetics and their deep-rooted psychological conditioning, they cannot rebel. They are utterly trapped. They stand fully aware of the relentless meat grinder they have been thrown into. Yet they are forced by their own augmented biology to march forward anyway. They suffer the complex mental anguish and trauma of a veteran human soldier, imprisoned within the mutated shell of an Abhuman, cursed with just enough intelligence to realize exactly how doomed they truly are. In the sprawling, dogmatic nightmare of the Imperium, faith is a weapon wielded with varying degrees of cynicism. The Adeptus Astartes, the mighty space marines, protect humanity out of a genetically ingrained sense of duty and transhuman pride. The Inquisition enforces the Emperor's will through the paralyzing application of absolute terror. But the Ogryn, their devotion is entirely different. They do not fight out of duty, nor do they fight because they fear the crack of a commissar's bold pistol. They fight because of love, pure, unadulterated, childish love. It is a concept so alien, so utterly disconnected from the brutal reality of the 41st millennium, that it borders on the absurd. To an Ogryn, the God Emperor of mankind is not a rotting corpse sitting atop a psychic torture device. He is a literal, tangible father figure who lives in the sky. They believe, with every fiber of their massive, mutated bodies, that the Emperor is actively watching them. When they swing their Ripper guns, they believe they are making him smile. When they die in the mud, they believe they are going to sit by his side. The ecclesiarchy spends centuries constructing towering, gilded cathedrals and chanting complex litanies to enforce a fraction of the devotion that an Ogryn possesses naturally. A human priest must constantly battle the creeping shadows of doubt, heresy, and despair. An Ogryn simply does not have the cognitive capacity to doubt. Their faith is an impenetrable fortress built entirely from the bricks of absolute ignorance. It is a pathetic, deeply moving reality. In a galaxy consumed by deceit, the most genuine form of worship comes from those the Imperium deems barely human. This profound simplicity grants them a bizarre, almost miraculous defense against the greatest threat to humanity, the ruinous powers. Consider the insidious nature of chaos. The dark gods prey upon the complex, multifaceted flaws of the human mind. Slaanesh tempts the obsessive pursuit of perfection. Khorne feeds upon the conscious, burning desire for martial supremacy and martial pride. Tzeentch exploits ambition and the hunger for forbidden knowledge. How do you tempt a creature that has absolutely no ambition, no pride, and no desire for knowledge? You cannot offer an Ogryn political power, because they do not understand what power is. You cannot offer them the secrets of the universe, because they cannot even read. The corrupting whispers of the warp simply slide off their minds like rain off a ceramite breastplate. They are too simple, too wonderfully obtuse to understand the existential promises of the demon. When a bloodletter of corn screams promises of endless slaughter, the Ogryn just sees a scary red monster that needs to be smashed for the Emp'rah. However, this does not mean they are entirely immune to the touch of chaos. Their innocence is their shield, but it is also their greatest vulnerability. An Ogryn will rarely, if ever, willingly turn to the ruinous powers out of ideological rebellion. But they can be tricked. If a corrupt, heretical commander whom the Ogryn trusts implicitly tells them that the forces of chaos are actually the good guys, the Ogryn will likely follow them straight into the Eye of Terror, completely unaware of their own damnation. They will butcher loyalist guardsmen and tear down the Emperor's statues, genuinely believing they are still following the righteous orders of their beloved parental figure. This is perhaps the most heart-wrenching aspect of their existence. Their purity is entirely dependent on the morality of the men who hold their leashes. They are the ultimate victims of circumstance, incapable of moral agency, yet forced to commit acts of unspeakable violence in a universe that does not care about their intentions. Thus, the Ogryn stands as a walking paradox within the Imperial war machine. They are the most brutal, blunt instruments of destruction available to the Astra Militarum, yet they possess the most uncorrupted, innocent souls in the entire galaxy. They are angels of absolute devotion trapped within the horrifying, mutated bodies of absolute monsters. And the Imperium, in its infinite wisdom and boundless cruelty, ensures that this beautiful, pure devotion is rewarded with nothing but a shallow, unmarked grave. When a space marine falls in battle, ancient bells toll in the fortress monasteries of their chapter, and their heroic deeds are recorded in glorious, illuminated manuscripts. When a highly decorated human general dies, grand marble statues are erected in the plazas of hive cities. But when an Ogryn dies, there is absolutely nothing. Their sacrifice is entirely unrecorded, treated as a mere statistical rounding error in the Departmentum Unitorum's endless ledgers of blood. There are no grand monuments erected to honor the Abhuman, no statues of hulking giants holding the line against the encroaching horrors of the war. When the battle is won, their colossal corpses are simply bulldozed into mass and marked graves. If they were boneheads, their skulls are ruthlessly cracked open by the tech priests to salvage the cybernetic implants, ensuring the sacred machinery can be scrubbed clean and hammered into the brain of the next disposable giant. To truly understand the suffocating, grimdark reality of their existence, picture the final moments of a standard Ogryn on a nameless, mud-soaked trench world. Your massive body is shattered, torn apart by orc choppers or relentless alien bioplasma. You are bleeding out into the toxic, churned earth, the agonizing physical pain numbed only by the freezing rain pouring down on the battlefield. But you are not crying out in despair. You are looking up at the burning, crimson sky, through the darkening haze of death. Your childlike mind clings to the absolute only truth it has ever known. You did exactly what the commissar told you to do. You protected your little human friends. You smashed the bad monsters. As your vision begins to fade into eternal black, you manage a weak, bloody smile, genuinely believing that somewhere up there among the stars, the God Emperor is looking down and whispering that you were a good boy. And right at that exact, heartbreaking moment of perceived salvation, a heavy, polished boot slams down onto your crushed chest. It is the very same Imperial officer who ordered you into the suicidal charge. He does not look down at your dying face. He does not offer a prayer for your departing soul. He simply uses your massive, broken body as a convenient stepping stone, ensuring his pristine boots stay out of the bloody mud as he retreats to the safety of his command bunker. This is the ultimate, sickening betrayal of the Astra Militarum. The Imperium takes the most genuine, innocent love humanity has left to offer, grinds it into a bloody pulp to fuel its eternal war machine, and does not even have the basic decency to say thank you. The Ogryn dies happy, completely and tragically blind to the fact that they were never a hero, but simply a fleshy, disposable barricade. The Imperium of Man loudly proclaims itself as the sole defender of humanity. It justifies its unspeakable atrocities, its endless meat grinders, and its cold-blooded inquisitions in the name of absolute survival. Yet, the tragic existence of the Ogryn proves that this desperate survival has come at the ultimate cost. They have sacrificed the very soul of humanity they claim to protect, weaponizing the purest form of love and turning it into disposable ammunition. The Ogryns serves as a dark, horrifying mirror held up to the 41st millennium. In a galaxy defined by endless treachery, insidious heresy, and the cruel laughter of thirsting gods, the only creatures capable of genuine, uncorrupted devotion are treated as mindless, expendable beasts. They are unshakable. Childlike faith only serves to highlight the profound moral decay of the commanders who so casually send them to their deaths. The ultimate tragedy is not simply that they die, but that they die for an empire that fundamentally does not deserve them. The 41st millennium is built on a foundation of such dark, forgotten sacrifices. If you want to uncover more of the horrifying truths hidden beneath the Imperial propaganda, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Leave a comment below with which dark corner of the Warhammer 40K universe you want us to decode next. Until then, remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, even innocence is just another weapon.